I really wasn't sure what to expect when I first traveled to Kenya as a tourist in 2003. As a child, I looked at the colorful pages of National Geographic magazine, never believing that I would one day witness firsthand elephants and giraffes roaming on the African savanna, or moreover, befriend African people who would eventually become like family to me. You just never know where life will take you if you give it a chance. I spent the last couple of weeks in February near a small rural Ugandan village called Chiabazala. CanAssist volunteers have recently funded construction of a secondary school building there, and we continue to be involved with that school. I lived for the week with a Ugandan family who looked after me like one of their own. Every day I would either ride on the back of a boda, or I would walk the 4 or 5 kilometers to the secondary school. This took me through Chiabazala village and along rutted red soil roads which were made muddy and slippery by the recent rains. There were maize fields and banana trees, meager homesteads, and little kiosk shops punctuating my route. So one afternoon I was on my way home and I was thirsty, so I stopped at a little wooden kiosk shop in the town and purchased a Coke. Coke products are available everywhere in the world, it seems. And as I stood there drinking it, lukewarm I might add because there's no refrigeration, I was slowly surrounded by about a dozen kids from the local elementary school who were coming home. They were all bedecked in bright pink school uniform shirts, and they had big white eyes and shining smiles. Some were apprehensive, and others were curious. And I'm standing there drinking my Coke, and I started to feel a bit guilty just drinking the soda and them staring back at me. And I ended up saying to the woman in the shop, have you got anything that maybe I could just give to these kids that they could have to eat? And she rummaged around under her counter. Now the shop was probably about 6 feet by 8 feet. It wasn't a big shop. And she came out with a box about maybe 1.5 feet by 8 inches tall that was full of cookies that were packaged in cellophane, individually packaged cookies. She said, and I thought this would be great. Okay, so I said, okay, you can give these to the kids. Well, I thought it was a good idea. She started to hand them out. With that, the kids started to swarm into the front of this shop, and I got backed into the corner of the shop. What were 12 kids at the beginning turned out to be about 50 within about 3 minutes. And they were all reaching up with their hands and yelling and laughing and asking for cookies. And the poor woman who had the shop was finding that they were starting to encroach and come right into her shop. And so she finally just took the box and threw the cookies out into the midst of them all, and they scrambled to get them. It reminded me of feeding the seagulls down in Confederation Basin. Inevitably, some of these kids would go without. It was impossible for me to give them all a treat. Their numbers just kept growing. But the 40 or so who did get cookies went away happy, and the shopkeeper was grateful for the business that I'd given her. It cost me about $3. When I left, the shopkeeper took my hand and knelt down in front of me and thanked me. It was such a small effort on my part, but something that was so significant to these people. A stranger passing along the road, showing kindness. The next day I went to the elementary school where these kids had attended. And it was a school with about 500 children in it, and they were all in classrooms, cement block classrooms with rudimentary desks and benches. The head teacher showed me around the school grounds, and we ended up outside a wooden lean-to, where there were a couple of women leaning over a great big metal pot stirring up some food that was bubbling up over an open fire. And this was lunch for the kids, most of whom would have come to school on empty stomachs, maybe only having a cup of tea at home before they set out to school around 6:30 in the morning. The lunch was a cup of unsweetened porridge, made from maize flour and from water that the kids had got from a muddy pond about 300 meters from the school. And this might be the only food that these kids get for the day. It's not nutritious, but it's filling. And as the children stood by waiting with their colored plastic mugs held up, the head teacher told me how they were having trouble finding the equivalent of 1,200 Canadian dollars that was needed for the semester to provide these kids with their lunch. Many of the parents couldn't afford the small fee that they charged for it, and many of the kids were in fact orphans. So I started to understand then the frenzied scramble that I'd seen the day before over the cookies. Then I was taken from classroom to classroom, where I was greeted by the children, and I spent the time answering questions about Canada. Can people really drive in the snow? What do you do when it's so cold? How do you stay warm? Is there corruption in Canada? Was one other good one. How far is it to Canada? And then how did you travel to get here? Then one little girl asked me, how much did it cost for you to travel in a plane from Canada to Uganda? And the answer to that was about $2,000. I looked down at this hungry kid, and I wondered how I could really answer that question honestly. Instinctively, my eyes sort of looked down. I was feeling a bit ashamed. And then hanging around my neck was a camera of about the same value. The value of my camera was probably more than enough to feed 500 school kids their only bowl of gruel a day for a semester. The thought of this inequity was disturbing. How can you actually provide meaningful, lasting help to a child like this? To focus your attention on one child would turn out like the cookie episode that I described earlier. As soon as you start to help one child, there'd be 50 or 100 or 100,000 others in the same condition who deserve and beg for assistance. So this is why I founded the CanAssist African Relief Trust. Using the principles espoused by Jeffrey Sachs and Peter Singer and based on the UN Millennium Development Goals, CanAssist's mandate is to improve community well-being by helping to provide growth of infrastructure in schools, health facilities, and provision of clean water and sanitation. Our objective is to help communities so that individuals, children, and adults alike within the community can benefit, become stronger, healthier, better educated. The aim is to allow the human capital within the African communities to develop, become self-directing, and self-sustaining. Is it working? Well, in the past 2 years, the CanAssist African Relief Trust, through donations from concerned Canadians, has funded projects that have provided clean water to a health facility in Kenya, a laundry building for a hospital in Tanzania, 2 classrooms and latrines for a remote Maasai community in Kenya where young children previously had to walk about 12 kilometers to get to school, regular food supply for an orphanage in Tanzania, a motorbike for a clinic in Uganda so that the nurse there at the clinic can do immunization and preventative outreach in the surrounding communities, a rainwater harvest tank for a clinic in Kenya, the cement floors that have dramatically reduced the jigger infection for a small school in Uganda, a large multi-purpose classroom building for a secondary school in Uganda, and we've irrigated and fenced a field that now grows food to support a school and an orphanage in Kenya. I've been able to personally visit all of these sites and to follow up, and I have come to the conclusion that yes, we can assist. Those of us who are involved with the CanAssist African Relief Trust plan to continue to work with many of these communities. Our funding relies entirely on the generosity of donors who share our desire to assist these vulnerable people to help each other. A few years ago, I gave a talk to a group of Queen's students who were looking to do some international health education outreach in Africa. As a thank you, they gave me a t-shirt. And on the back of it was a quotation by Margaret Mead. Never underestimate the power of a small group of committed people to change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. I think she was right. And I think this remains sage advice that we can all follow. And my message is never think that that little thing that we do to help people is insignificant, because all those little things add up. You can assist, and you can make a difference.